Captain Marcus Thompson had served the royal family for 15 years. His hands, once steady as stone when holding his sword, now trembled as he stood outside Princess Charlotte's bedroom door. The 10-year-old princess had been crying for hours, clutching her stomach and begging for help that seemed impossible to give. The royal physician, Dr. Harrison, had examined Charlotte 3 times that day. Each time, he emerged from her room with the same confused expression and the same helpless shrug. "I cannot find anything wrong, Your Majesty," he had told King Edward. "Perhaps it is something she ate, or maybe anxiety from the upcoming coronation ceremony." But Marcus knew better. He had watched Charlotte grow from a tiny baby into the bright, curious girl she was today. He had seen her through scraped knees, nightmares, and the death of her beloved grandmother. This was different. This was real pain, and it was getting worse. The palace hallways echoed with whispered conversations between servants and advisors. Everyone was worried, but no one knew what to do. Queen Isabella had barely left Charlotte's side, holding her daughter's hand and singing soft lullabies that usually helped the princess sleep. But tonight, nothing was working. Marcus remembered the first time he had met Charlotte. She was only 3 years old then, running through the palace gardens in a bright yellow dress, chasing butterflies with her chubby little hands. Her laughter had filled the air like music, and Marcus had thought to himself that protecting this innocent child would be the greatest honor of his life. Now, as he listened to her quiet sobs through the thick wooden door, his heart felt like it was breaking into 1,000 pieces. His hands shook not from fear of battle or danger, but from the helplessness of watching someone he cared about suffer. The princess had always been special to Marcus. Unlike other royal guards who kept their distance, Charlotte had somehow found her way into his heart. She would skip up to him during his morning rounds, asking about his family, telling him about her lessons, or sharing some silly joke she had learned. She treated him not as a servant, but as a friend. "Captain Thompson," she would say in her sweet, high voice, "did you know that elephants are afraid of mice? Isn't that funny? Something so big being scared of something so small." Marcus would smile and listen to every word, amazed by her curiosity and kindness. She had a way of making even the most serious adults feel lighter, happier. The whole palace seemed brighter when Charlotte was around. But for the past week, something had been wrong. It started small, Charlotte picking at her breakfast, saying her tummy felt funny. Then came the complaints of pain, growing stronger each day. She tried to hide it at first, not wanting to worry her parents. But children cannot hide pain the way adults can, and soon everyone knew something was seriously wrong. Dr. Harrison was a good man and a skilled physician, but he was old-fashioned. He believed in simple explanations for simple problems. When Charlotte first complained of stomach pain, he prescribed rest and bland foods. When that did not work, he suggested warm baths and herbal teas. Each remedy failed, and each failure made the doctor more frustrated and defensive. Children often imagine pains, Dr. Harrison had told the king and Queen during their private meeting earlier that evening. The mind can create very real physical sensations, especially in young ones who are sensitive or anxious. But Marcus had seen real pain before. He had been wounded in battle, had watched fellow soldiers suffer from injuries and illnesses. He knew the difference between imagined discomfort and genuine agony. Charlotte's pain was real, and it was getting worse. The castle felt different these past few days. Usually filled with laughter, music, and the busy sounds of daily life, it now seemed quiet and tense. Servants spoke in whispers, moving through the halls like ghosts. Even the kitchen staff, normally cheerful and loud, worked in worried silence. Lady Margaret, Charlotte's governess, had been beside herself with concern. She had raised 3 children of her own and knew that something was terribly wrong. "That child is suffering," she told Marcus privately. "I have never seen her like this. She's trying so hard to be brave, but she is scared, and she is hurting." The royal family's closest advisor, Lord Pemberton, had suggested calling in physicians from other kingdoms. Perhaps a fresh perspective might help, he offered. But King Edward was hesitant to admit that his own royal physician could not handle the situation. Pride and politics often got in the way of common sense, even when a child's health was at stake. Marcus thought about his own daughter, Sarah, who was about Charlotte's age. If Sarah were in pain like this, he would move heaven and earth to find help. He would not care about pride or appearances. He would only care about making his child better. The thought made his hands shake even more. He gripped his sword handle, trying to steady himself, but it did not help. The weight of his helplessness was heavier than any armor he had ever worn. Through the door, he could hear Queen Isabella's voice, soft and strained. "So, my darling, Mama is here. Everything will be all right." But even the Queen's voice carried doubt and fear. Marcus had served the royal family through many challenges. Political tensions with neighboring kingdoms, economic troubles, natural disasters that affected the realm. He had always known his role, always understood how to help. But this was different. This was a child in pain, and all his strength, all his training, all his dedication meant nothing if he could not protect her from whatever was hurting her. He thought about all the times Charlotte had asked him about his job. "Do you really protect us from bad people?" she had asked once, her big blue eyes full of curiosity. "Yes, Princess," he had answered. "It is my honor to keep you safe." "Will you always protect me?" she had pressed, in a way children do when they want absolute promises about an uncertain world. "Always," he had said, meaning it with every fiber of his being. Now that promise fell hollow. How could he protect her from something he could not see or fight? How could he guard against an enemy that lived inside her own body? The clock in the hallway chimed midnight. Charlotte had been in pain for nearly 6 hours straight now. The longest 6 hours of Marcus's life. He had faced enemy armies with less fear than he felt standing outside that door, listening to a child suffer. He remembered the day Charlotte had fallen from her horse during riding lessons. She had been unconscious for several terrifying minutes, and Marcus had never felt so afraid. But that fear had purpose. He could act, could help carry her to safety, could do something useful. This was worse because there was nothing he could do except stand guard and listen to her cry. Dr. Harrison emerged from the room again, looking even more frustrated than before. His usually neat appearance was disheveled, his gray hair sticking up at odd angles. "I have given her something to help her sleep," he told Marcus quietly. "Perhaps rest will help the pain subside." But Marcus could still hear Charlotte's quiet whimpers through the door. Whatever medicine the doctor had given her was not working. Nothing was working. "Doctor," Marcus said carefully, "perhaps we should consider that this might be something more serious than indigestion or anxiety." Dr. Harrison's face darkened. He did not appreciate suggestions from a guard, no matter how well-meaning. "Captain Thompson, I have been practicing medicine since before you were born. I think I can diagnose a child's stomach ache without advice from someone whose expertise lies in wielding a sword." Marcus bit back his response. Arguing with the doctor would not help Charlotte. But his frustration was growing alongside his fear. Someone needed to advocate for the princess. Someone needed to push for better answers. Inside the room, Charlotte's voice rose in a cry of pain that cut through Marcus like a blade. His hands clenched in a fist, his whole body tensing with a desperate need to do something, anything, to help. That cry would haunt his dreams for years to come. It was the sound of a child's innocence being shattered by pain and fear. It was the sound of his own failure to protect someone he loved. The princess he had watched grow from a giggling toddler into a bright, curious girl was suffering, and he was powerless to stop it. His hands shook not just from helplessness now, but from a growing anger at a system that seemed more concerned with protecting reputations than protecting a child. As the long night stretched ahead, Marcus made a silent vow. He would find a way to help Charlotte, even if it meant going against protocol, even if it meant challenging the authority of doctors and advisors. The little girl who had trusted him to always protect her deserved someone who would fight for her, no matter what. The palace might be filled with people who had given up looking for answers, but Marcus Thompson had not given up. Not yet. Not while Charlotte still needed him. His hands might shake, but his resolve was growing stronger with each passing hour. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to find help for the princess. And Marcus would be ready. Dawn broke gray and cold over the palace, but Marcus had not slept. He had spent the entire night pacing the corridors, his mind racing with possibilities and his heart heavy with worry. Charlotte's cries had finally quieted around 3 in the morning, but it was not the peaceful quiet of recovery. It was the exhausted silence of a child who had no energy left to express her pain. As the first servants began their morning routines, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He could not continue to stand by and watch while Charlotte suffered. Someone needed to take action, and if the adults in charge would not do it, then he would. His first stop was the Palace Library, a vast room filled with medical texts and journals from across the known world. Marcus was not a learned man in the traditional sense, but 15 years of palace life had taught him to read well, and his concern for Charlotte gave him focus he had never possessed before. He pulled book after book from the shelves, searching for anything that might explain Charlotte's symptoms. Most of the medical texts were written in language he struggled to understand, full of Latin terms and complex theories. But he persisted, driven by the memory of Charlotte's cries echoing through the night. In a journal written by a physician from the Eastern Kingdoms, Marcus found something that made his blood run cold. The author described cases of severe abdominal pain in children that had been dismissed as imagination or anxiety, only to discover later that the children had been suffering from serious internal conditions that required immediate treatment. One case in particular caught his attention. A young noble girl, about Charlotte's age, had complained of intense stomach pain for several days. The court physicians had prescribed rest and simple remedies, insisting nothing was seriously wrong. The girl died 3 days later from a burst appendix, a condition that could have been treated if caught in time. Marcus's hands shook as he read the account. The symptoms described matched Charlotte's almost exactly. The initial mild discomfort, the gradual increase in pain, the way it seemed to center on one particular area of the stomach. The author emphasized that children often could not describe their pain accurately, making diagnosis difficult, but that adults had a responsibility to take their suffering seriously. Armed with this new knowledge, Marcus hurried to find Dr. Harrison. The physician was in his study, looking tired and irritated. He had obviously not slept well either, but his frustration seemed directed at Charlotte rather than at his own inability to help her. "Doctor," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice respectful despite his urgency, "I've been reading about similar cases, and I think we need to consider that Princess Charlotte might have something called appendicitis." Dr. Harrison looked up from his papers with barely concealed annoyance. "Captain Thompson, I appreciate your concern, but I hardly think you are qualified to make medical diagnoses based on your reading of a few books." "But the symptoms match exactly," Marcus insisted, placing the open journal on the doctor's desk. "Look at this case study. The pain, the location, the way it has gotten progressively worse. What if we are missing something serious?" The doctor barely glanced at the journal before pushing it away. "Appendicitis is extremely rare in children," he said dismissively, "and the symptoms you describe could indicate dozens of different conditions, most of them minor. I will not have you spreading panic based on your amateur interpretation of medical texts." Marcus felt his temper rising, but he forced himself to remain calm. "What if you are wrong? What if Charlotte is seriously ill, and we are wasting precious time?" "I am not wrong," Dr. Harrison snapped. "I have examined the princess thoroughly. She has no fever, no vomiting, no signs of serious illness. It is a simple case of stomach upset, probably caused by anxiety about the upcoming ceremonies. Children are sensitive creatures, and sometimes their emotions manifest as physical symptoms." But Marcus remembered Charlotte's face the night before, twisted with genuine pain. No child, no matter how sensitive or anxious, could fake that level of suffering. He thought about the journal article about the young girl who had died because adults had not taken her pain seriously enough. "I would like permission to seek a second opinion," Marcus said carefully. "There is a physician in the village, Dr. Emma Whitfield, who specializes in children's ailments. Perhaps she could examine the princess." Dr. Harrison's face turned red with indignation. "Absolutely not. I will not have my professional reputation undermined by bringing in some village doctor to second-guess my diagnosis. The princess is under my care, and I will not tolerate interference." Marcus left the doctor's study with his hands shaking harder than ever, but now it was anger as much as fear that made them tremble. He understood the doctor's pride, but Charlotte's life was more important than anyone's reputation. His next stop was Lady Margaret's quarters. The governess was awake, sitting by her window, and staring out at the gardens where Charlotte loved to play. Her usually perfect appearance was disheveled, her eyes red from crying. "Lady Margaret," Marcus said gently, "I need your help." She turned to him with desperate eyes. "Oh, Marcus, I'm so worried about our dear Charlotte. She was in such pain last night. I have never seen her suffer like that." Marcus told her about his research, about the possibility of appendicitis, and about Dr. Harrison's refusal to consider other opinions. Lady Margaret listened with growing alarm. My oldest son had appendicitis when he was 12, she said quietly. The symptoms you describe, yes, they're very similar. The doctors nearly waited too long to operate. If we had delayed another day. She did not finish the sentence, but Marcus understood. Will you help me convince the king and queen to seek another opinion? Marcus asked. Lady Margaret nodded firmly. That child's life is worth more than Dr. Harrison's pride. We must act quickly. Together, they made their way to the royal quarters. King Edward and Queen Isabella had spent the night in chairs beside Charlotte's bed, unwilling to leave their daughter's side. They looked exhausted and frightened, but they listened carefully as Marcus and Lady Margaret presented their concerns. You think Charlotte might have this appendicitis? Queen Isabella asked, her voice barely a whisper. I think it is possible, Your Majesty, Marcus replied. And if it is, time is very important. The condition can become life-threatening if not treated quickly. King Edward was torn between his trust in Dr. Harrison and his growing fear for his daughter's life. But Dr. Harrison is our royal physician. He has served the family for 20 years. Surely he would recognize something so serious. Sometimes, Lady Margaret said gently, even good doctors can miss things, especially when they are too close to the situation. A fresh perspective might be exactly what Charlotte needs. Before the king could respond, Charlotte stirred her bed. She had been sleeping fitfully, but now she was awake again, and the pain had clearly returned. Her small face was pale and drawn, and she clutched her stomach with both hands. Mama, she whispered, it hurts so much. Please make it stop. Queen Isabella took her daughter's hand, tears streaming down her face. We are trying, my darling. We are doing everything we can. But Charlotte looked directly at Marcus, her blue eyes filled with pain and trust. Captain Thompson, she said in a voice so weak it broke his heart. You promised you would always protect me. Can you make the hurt go away? Those words hit Marcus like a physical blow. This child, who was suffering more than any child should ever have to suffer, still believed in him. She still trusted him to keep his promise. I will find a way, princess, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I promise I will find a way to help you. King Edward saw the exchange between his daughter and the guard who had protected their family for so many years. He saw the genuine love and concern in Marcus's eyes, and he made a decision that would save his daughter's life. Send for this village doctor, he commanded. Dr. Whitfield, was it? Bring her here immediately. Your Majesty, Dr. Harrison protested, appearing in the doorway. This is highly irregular. I must advise against. You may advise all you like, the king interrupted, his voice carrying the full authority of the crown. But my daughter's life comes before protocol or professional courtesy. The village doctor will examine Charlotte, and we will hear her opinion. Dr. Harrison's face showed his displeasure, but he dared not argue further with the king's direct command. Marcus volunteered to ride to the village himself to fetch Dr. Whitfield. As he prepared his horse, his hands finally stopped shaking. He had a mission now, a way to help Charlotte that did not involve standing helplessly outside her door. The ride to the village took 30 minutes through winding forest paths. Marcus pushed his horse as hard as he dared, knowing that every minute might be crucial. The morning air was cool against his face, but his heart raced with a mixture of hope and fear. Dr. Emma Whitfield lived in a modest cottage on the edge of the village. She was younger than Dr. Harrison, perhaps 40 years old, with kind eyes and gentle hands that spoke of years spent caring for children. When Marcus explained the situation, she did not hesitate. Let me gather my instruments, she said. If you're right about appendicitis, we may need to act very quickly. The ride back to the palace seemed to take forever, though Dr. Whitfield proved to be an excellent rider. She asked Marcus detailed questions about Charlotte's symptoms, when they had started, how they had progressed. Her questions were different from Dr. Harrison's, more specific and focused. Has she been running a fever? She asked. Not that anyone has mentioned, Marcus replied. Has she vomited? No, but she has not been eating either. And the pain, does it seem to be in one particular spot, or does it move around? Marcus thought about what he had observed. It seems to be mostly on her right side, low in her stomach. Dr. Whitfield nodded grimly. Those symptoms could indeed suggest appendicitis. In children, the condition can present differently than in adults, which sometimes makes diagnosis difficult. When they arrived at the palace, Dr. Whitfield was immediately taken to Charlotte's room. Dr. Harrison was present, watching with obvious disapproval as the village doctor examined his patient. But Dr. Whitfield ignored the tension in the room, focusing entirely on Charlotte. She spoke to the princess in a soft, reassuring voice, explaining everything she was doing. "I'm going to press gently on your stomach, sweetheart. I want you to tell me if it hurts more in any particular spot." Charlotte nodded bravely, though tears rolled down her cheeks as Dr. Whitfield conducted her examination. When the doctor pressed on a specific area of Charlotte's lower right abdomen, the princess cried out in pain. "And when I released the pressure?" Dr. Whitfield asked, removing her hand. Charlotte's cry became even more intense. "It hurts worse when you stop pressing." Dr. Whitfield's face became very serious. She turned to the royal family with the gravity of someone who understood the full weight of her next words. "Your Majesties," she said quietly, "Princess Charlotte has acute appendicitis. Her appendix needs to be removed immediately or will burst. If that happens..." She did not need to finish the sentence. The room fell silent except for Charlotte's quiet whimpers. Dr. Harrison looked stunned, his face pale as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. Marcus felt relief and terror in equal measure. Relief that they finally had an answer, terror at how close they had come to losing Charlotte forever. His hands began to shake again, but this time it was from the overwhelming realization that his persistence, his refusal to accept Dr. Harrison's diagnosis, might have saved the princess's life. "How soon must the operation happen?" King Edward asked. "Within the next few hours," Dr. Whitfield replied. "We cannot wait any longer." The next few hours would determine whether Charlotte lived or died, whether Marcus's promise to always protect her would be kept or broken. But for the first time since the ordeal began, he felt hope. They had identified the enemy at last, and now they could fight it. The palace transformed into a flurry of controlled chaos as preparations began for Charlotte's emergency surgery. Dr. Whitfield took charge with calm efficiency, directing servants to boil water, gather clean linens, and prepare the largest table in Charlotte's sitting room for the operation. There was no proper surgical facility in the palace, but there was no time to transport Charlotte elsewhere. Marcus watched the preparations with a mixture of relief and terror. Finally, someone was taking action to help Charlotte, but the risks of surgery in 1485 were enormous. He had seen battlefield surgeries, had watched strong men die from infections that set in after seemingly successful operations. The thought of Charlotte facing such dangers made his chest tight with fear. Dr. Whitfield called for Dr. Harrison to assist her, putting aside their professional differences for Charlotte's sake. "I will need your help," she told him quietly. "Two experienced hands are better than one, and the princess needs both of us focused on saving her life, not on our pride." Dr. Harrison, humbled by his near-catastrophic misdiagnosis, nodded silently. His face showed the weight of knowing he had almost let a child die through his stubbornness. Whatever ego had driven his earlier behavior was now crushed under the reality of Charlotte's critical condition. As the doctors prepared their instruments, Marcus found himself thinking about his own daughter, Sarah. She was safe at home with his wife, probably playing in their small garden or helping with the morning chores. The contrast between Sarah's carefree day and Charlotte's life-threatening crisis struck him powerfully. Royal birth brought many privileges, but it could not protect against illness or pain. Queen Isabella refused to leave Charlotte's side during the preparations. She held her daughter's hand, stroking her hair and whispering words of love and encouragement. "You are so brave, my darling," she said. "Soon the doctors will fix what is hurting you, and you'll feel better." Charlotte, despite her pain, tried to comfort her mother. "Don't cry, Mama," she whispered. "Captain Thompson found the right doctor. He kept his promise to protect me." Those words hit Marcus like an arrow to the heart. Even in her agony, Charlotte was thinking of others, trying to ease her mother's fears. She had such faith in him, such trust that he would find a way to help her. The weight of that responsibility was almost overwhelming. King Edward paced the room like a caged animal, his usual royal composure shattered by helplessness. "How long will the operation take?" he asked Dr. Whitfield for the third time. "It depends on what we find when we open her up," the doctor replied patiently. "If the appendix has not yet burst, it could be relatively quick. If there are complications..." She left the sentence hanging, but everyone understood the implications. Dr. Whitfield began explaining the procedure to Charlotte in simple terms, trying to prepare the 10-year-old for what was to come. I'm going to give you some medicine that will make you sleep, she said gently. While you're sleeping, Dr. Harrison, and I will remove the part of your body that is causing the pain. When you wake up, you will feel sore, but the terrible hurt will be gone. Charlotte nodded bravely, though her lower lip trembled with fear. Will you be here when I wake up, Captain Thompson? She asked, looking directly at Marcus. I will be right outside this door, Marcus promised. I will not move from this spot until you are awake and feeling better. Good, Charlotte said with a small smile. Then I know I will be safe. The trust in her voice nearly brought Marcus to his knees. This child, who had spent the last day and night in agony, who was about to undergo dangerous surgery with no guarantee of survival, still had faith in his ability to protect her. He vowed silently that he would spend the rest of his life being worthy of that faith. As Dr. Whitfield prepared the primitive anesthetic, a mixture of herbs and alcohol that would hopefully keep Charlotte unconscious during the surgery, Lady Margaret arrived with additional supplies. She had commandeered half the kitchen staff to help with preparations, turning the usually orderly palace into an emergency medical facility. The water is boiling, Lady Margaret reported. The linens have been cleaned and prepared. Cook has prepared broth for when the princess wakes up, something gentle that will not upset her stomach. Dr. Whitfield nodded approvingly. Excellent. We will need to keep her very still for several days after the surgery to allow proper healing. Any jarring or sudden movement could reopen the incision. Marcus thought about Charlotte's usual energy, how she loved to run through the palace halls and play in the gardens. Keeping her still and quiet would be almost as challenging as the surgery itself. But if it meant she would live, he would personally guard her bedside to ensure she followed the doctor's orders. The time came for the surgery to begin. Dr. Whitfield gently administered the anesthetic, and slowly Charlotte's eyes grew heavy. I love you, Mama, she whispered as consciousness faded. I love you too, my precious girl, Queen Isabella replied, tears streaming down her face. Marcus was asked to help move Charlotte to the makeshift operating table. As he lifted her small, limp form, he was struck by how fragile she felt, how light and vulnerable. This child who had seemed so full of life and energy now lay unconscious, dependent entirely on the skill of the doctors and the grace of God. The surgery began with Dr. Whitfield making a careful incision in Charlotte's lower abdomen. Marcus, positioned outside the door as promised, could hear the quiet, intense conversation between the two doctors as they worked. Occasionally, their voices would rise with urgency, and Marcus's heart would pound with fear. There is some infection, but not as much as I feared, he heard Dr. Whitfield say. The appendix is very inflamed, Dr. Harrison replied. Much worse than I thought possible. How did I miss this? Sometimes the early signs are subtle, Dr. Whitfield said kindly. What matters now is that we caught it in time. The surgery seemed to last forever, though Marcus later learned it had taken less than 2 hours. Every minute felt like a year as he stood guard outside Charlotte's door, his hands clasped behind his back to hide their trembling. Servants and courtiers passed by regularly, all asking for updates, all sharing his anxiety for the beloved princess. Lord Pemberton approached Marcus during the surgery, his usually confident demeanor replaced by genuine concern. How is she faring, Captain? The doctors are still working, Marcus replied. Dr. Whitfield seems confident, but he could not finish the sentence. There were too many things that could go wrong, too many ways that could still lose Charlotte. You did the right thing, Lord Pemberton said quietly, pushing for a second opinion, refusing to accept Dr. Harrison's initial diagnosis. If you had not spoken up. He shook his head, not wanting to voice the alternative outcome. Marcus nodded, but felt no satisfaction in being right. All that mattered was Charlotte's recovery. His own vindication meant nothing compared to her life. Inside the room, he could hear Dr. Whitfield giving instructions to Dr. Harrison about suturing the incision. Small, even stitches, she said. We want to minimize scarring and ensure proper healing. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Dr. Whitfield emerged from the room. Her face was tired but relieved, her hands still stained with blood despite careful washing. The surgery was successful, she announced to the anxious group gathered in the hallway. We removed the appendix before it burst, though it was very close. Princess Charlotte should make a full recovery, provided she rests and allows proper healing. Marcus felt his knees go weak with relief. Charlotte was alive. The surgery had worked. His promise to protect her had been kept, though barely and only through the grace of others more skilled than himself. When will she wake up? Queen Isabella asked, her voice hoarse from hours of crying and worry. Within the next few hours, Dr. Whitfield replied. She will be groggy and sore but conscious. The worst is over now. King Edward clasped Dr. Whitfield's hand gratefully. Doctor, our family owes you a debt we can never repay. You have saved our daughter's life. I am honored to have been able to help, Dr. Whitfield replied. But much credit goes to Captain Thompson here. If he had not researched the symptoms and pushed for a second opinion, we might have been too late. Marcus felt uncomfortable with the praise. He had simply done what his heart demanded, what his love for Charlotte required. Any decent person would have done the same, he told himself. As Charlotte was moved to a clean bed for recovery, Marcus resumed his vigil outside her door. This time, though his hands were steady, the immediate crisis had passed, and now his job was to ensure she had the peace and quiet needed for healing. Dr. Whitfield stayed at the palace to monitor Charlotte's recovery, checking on her regularly and adjusting her care as needed. She proved to be not just a skilled surgeon, but a compassionate healer, taking time to explain everything to Charlotte's worried parents and ensuring their daughter had every possible advantage for a complete recovery. When Charlotte finally woke up several hours later, her first words were weak but clear. Captain Thompson, are you there? I am here, Princess, Marcus replied, stepping into the room with permission from her parents. Just as I promised. Charlotte smiled weakly, her eyes still cloudy from the anesthetic. You did protect me, she whispered. You found the right doctor. Dr. Whitfield did all the hard work, Marcus replied. I just asked the right questions. Thank you, Charlotte said simply, and then drifted back in a healing sleep. Marcus returned to his post outside her door, finally allowing himself to feel the full weight of relief. Charlotte was alive, the surgery had been successful, and she would recover completely. His hands no longer shook with fear or helplessness. For the first time in days, he felt at peace. The long night of terror was over, but the journey to full recovery was just beginning. Marcus settled in for another vigil, this one hopeful rather than desperate, as Charlotte began her slow but steady return to health. The days following Charlotte's surgery became a delicate dance of hope and careful vigilance. Dr. Whitfield had warned that the next week would be critical. Infection could still set in, the incision needed to heal properly, and Charlotte's young body needed time to recover from the trauma of both illness and surgery. Marcus maintained his post outside Charlotte's door with the dedication of a holy sentinel. King Edward had offered to assign additional guards to give him rest, but Marcus refused. I promised the princess I would be here when she woke up, he said simply. I intend to keep that promise until she no longer needs me. The truth was, Marcus could not bear to leave. After coming so close to losing Charlotte, after witnessing her pain and fear, he felt an overwhelming need to ensure her safety personally. Sleep came in brief snatches in the chair outside her door. Meals were brought to him, though he barely tasted the food. His entire world had narrowed to the sounds from Charlotte's room and the regular reports from Dr. Whitfield. On the second day after surgery, Charlotte developed a slight fever. Marcus watched Dr. Whitfield's face carefully as she examined the princess, looking for any sign of serious concern. The doctor's expression was thoughtful, but not panicked, which helped calm Marcus's racing heart. A small fever is not unusual after surgery, Dr. Whitfield explained to Charlotte's parents. Her body is working hard to heal. We must watch it carefully, but it is not necessarily cause for alarm. Still, that fever made everyone nervous. Dr. Harrison, who had thrown himself into Charlotte's care with the fervor of someone seeking redemption, checked on her every few hours. His earlier arrogance had been completely replaced by humble dedication to his young patient's recovery. Charlotte herself was trying to be brave, though Marcus could see the fear in her eyes when she thought no one was looking. She was old enough to understand that she had been very sick, that something inside her body had tried to hurt her. The concept of betrayal by her own body was confusing and frightening for a 10-year-old mind. Why did this happen to me? She asked Dr. Whitfield during one examination. Did I do something wrong? Dr. Whitfield sat on the edge of Charlotte's bed, her voice gentle and patient. Oh, sweetheart, you did nothing wrong at all. Sometimes bodies just get sick, like sometimes the weather turns stormy, even when we want sunshine. It is not anyone's fault, and it does not mean you are bad or weak. But It hurts so much, Charlotte whispered. I was scared. Of course you were scared, Dr. Whitfield replied. Being in pain is frightening, especially when we do not understand why. But look how brave you were. You told your family when something was wrong. You let us help you, and you were so strong during your surgery. Marcus watched this exchange from the doorway, marveling at Dr. Whitfield's ability to comfort a frightened child. He thought about his own daughter, Sarah, how she would sometimes ask similar questions when she scraped her knee or caught a cold. Children needed to understand that pain was not punishment, that getting help was not weakness. On the third day, Charlotte's fever broke, and her appetite began to return. Lady Margaret brought small portions of broth and soft bread, watching with motherly satisfaction as Charlotte slowly ate. Each spoonful was a small victory, a sign that the princess's body was healing. "This tastes good," Charlotte said, sounding surprised. I had forgotten what it felt like to be hungry. The comment struck Marcus powerfully. For days, Charlotte had been so consumed by pain that normal sensations like hunger had disappeared. Now they were returning, along with her natural curiosity and energy. These were the best possible signs of recovery. Dr. Whitfield began allowing short visits from other members of the palace staff who had been worried about Charlotte. Cook came with special treats designed for a recovering patient. The stable master brought news about Charlotte's favorite horse. Even the serious-minded palace treasurer stopped by with a small carved wooden toy he had made during his anxious vigil. Each visitor remarked on how much better Charlotte looked, how her color was returning, how her eyes were bright again. Marcus felt pride in these observations, as if he had personally helped bring about her recovery. In a way, he supposed he had. His refusal to accept the initial diagnosis had been the first step towards saving her life. On the fourth day, Charlotte was allowed to sit up in bed for short periods. Marcus watched from the doorway as she struggled with the simple task that had once been effortless. The surgery had weakened her more than anyone had anticipated, but her determination was evident in every movement. "I want to see my garden," she said to her mother. "Can someone carry me to the window?" Queen Isabella looked to Dr. Whitfield, who nodded approval. Together, they carefully helped Charlotte to the large window that overlooked the palace gardens. Marcus stepped into the room to help steady the princess as she leaned against the window frame. "Look," Charlotte said with wonder. "Everything is still growing. The roses are blooming, and the butterflies are still there." She sounded amazed, as if she had expected the world to stop while she was ill. "Life continues," Dr. Whitfield said gently, "and now you can be part of it again." Marcus understood Charlotte's amazement. During her illness, the world had indeed seemed to stop for those who loved her. The normal rhythms of palace life had been suspended while everyone focused on her recovery. Seeing her reconnect with the continuing world beyond her sick room was deeply moving. That afternoon, Charlotte asked if she could have visitors from outside the immediate family. Dr. Whitfield agreed, provided the visits were brief and did not tire the patient. The first person Charlotte requested to see was Marcus. "Captain Thompson," she said as he approached her bedside, "I wanted to thank you properly for saving my life." Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Princess, I did not save your life. Dr. Whitfield did that with her skill and courage. But you found her," Charlotte insisted. "You did not give up when everyone else said nothing was seriously wrong. You kept your promise to protect me, even when it was hard." Marcus knelt beside her bed, bringing himself to her eye level. "Princess Charlotte, protecting you is not a duty for me. It is an honor and a privilege. You are precious to me and to everyone in this palace. We would do anything to keep you safe." Charlotte reached out and took his hand with her small, still weak fingers. "I know," she said simply. "I have always known that." That evening, Dr. Whitfield announced that Charlotte was healing better than expected and that the risk of infection had largely passed. The incision was closing cleanly, her strength was returning, and her appetite was almost back to normal. She will need another week of bed rest, the doctor explained to the royal family, and then gradual return to normal activities. But I see no reason why she should not make a complete recovery. King Edward formally thanked Dr. Whitfield and offered her a permanent position as royal physician, alongside Dr. Harrison. The two doctors had developed a mutual respect during Charlotte's treatment, each recognizing the other's skills and dedication. "I would be honored," Dr. Whitfield replied, "but I think I can serve the royal family best by continuing my practice in the village and being available for consultation when needed." The people in my village depend on me, just as you depend on Dr. Harrison. The king understood and respected her decision, though he insisted on providing her with resources to improve her village practice. You saved my daughter's life, he said. That service can never be fully repaid, but it will never be forgotten. As the immediate crisis passed and normal routines slowly returned to the palace, Marcus found himself reflecting on the lessons of the past week. He had learned that sometimes protecting someone meant challenging authority, asking difficult questions, and refusing to accept unsatisfactory answers. He had also learned about the power of persistence and advocacy. If he had simply accepted Dr. Harrison's initial diagnosis, Charlotte might have died. His willingness to research, to seek alternatives, and to push for a second opinion had literally saved her life. Most importantly, he had learned that the bond between himself and Charlotte was deeper than he had realized. She was not just his charge or responsibility. She was genuinely precious to him, like a second daughter. Her faith in his protection had given him strength he did not know he possessed. On the 7th day after surgery, Charlotte was allowed to walk slowly around her room for the first time. Marcus watched from the doorway as she took careful, deliberate steps, her face showing concentration and determination. Each step was a victory, a declaration that she was returning to the world of the living and healthy. "Look, Captain Thompson," she called to him. "I can walk to the window by myself." "I see that, Princess," Marcus replied, his voice thick with emotion. "You are getting stronger every day." Charlotte beamed at the praise, her face radiant with the joy of recovery. In that moment, Marcus felt a peace he had not known since the ordeal began. Charlotte was truly going to be all right. His promise had been kept, his faith had been rewarded, and the little girl who had trusted him with her life was safe and healing. The worst was over, but the bonds forged during Charlotte's illness would last a lifetime. Marcus had discovered depths of love and commitment he had not known he possessed, and Charlotte had learned that sometimes the most important protection comes from those who refuse to give up hope. 3 weeks after Charlotte's surgery, the palace had returned to something resembling normal life, though everyone who had lived through the crisis carried the experience with them like a permanent reminder of how precious and fragile life could be. The princess was making remarkable progress, already able to walk through the corridors for short distances and beginning to show interest in resuming her studies. Marcus had finally been convinced to resume his normal duties, though he still checked on Charlotte multiple times each day. The experience had changed him in ways he was still discovering. His fellow guards noticed that he seemed more serious, more purposeful. His wife, Sarah, had commented that he held their daughter closer and longer when he returned home each evening. Charlotte herself had been transformed by her ordeal. The carefree child who had run through the palace gardens chasing butterflies was still there, but she now possessed a depth of understanding about pain, fear, and recovery that most children never experienced. She was more thoughtful, more appreciative of simple pleasures, and more conscious of the people who cared for her. "I had the strangest dream while I was sick," Charlotte told Marcus during one of his visits to her room. "I dreamed that I was lost in a dark forest, and I could hear voices calling my name, but I could not find my way toward them. Then suddenly, there was a light, and I could see the path home." Marcus listened carefully, understanding that children often process traumatic experiences through dreams and stories. "Who was calling your name in the dream, Princess?" "Everyone who loves me," Charlotte replied simply. "Mama and Papa, Lady Margaret, Dr. Whitfield, and you. Your voices were the loudest because you never stopped calling, even when I could not answer." The metaphor was more accurate than Charlotte probably realized. During her illness, the people who loved her had indeed been calling her back from a very dark and dangerous place. Their persistence, their refusal to give up, had literally saved her life. Dr. Whitfield continued to visit the palace regularly to monitor Charlotte's recovery, though her medical attention was no longer urgently needed. She had become part of the extended palace family, someone whose wisdom and compassion were valued beyond her medical skills. "Children are remarkably resilient," she told Marcus during one of these visits. "Charlotte's body has healed beautifully, and her spirit seems stronger than ever. The experience has taught her that she can survive difficult things, which will serve her well throughout her life." Marcus nodded, though he hoped Charlotte would never again face anything as frightening as appendicitis. Still, He understood Dr. Whitfield's point. Charlotte now knew that pain was temporary, that help was available, and that she was surrounded by people who would never give up on her. The relationship between Dr. Harrison and Dr. Whitfield had evolved into a genuine partnership. The older physician had swallowed his pride and asked to learn from her diagnostic techniques. Together, they were developing new protocols for evaluating sick children, ensuring that future cases would be caught more quickly. Pride nearly cost a child her life. Dr. Harrison confided to Marcus one day, "I will not make that mistake again." Sometimes the most important thing a doctor can do is admit when they need help. Marcus respected the older man's honesty and humility. It took courage to admit a mistake of that magnitude, and it took wisdom to learn from it. Charlotte's crisis had taught everyone involved important lessons about the value of second opinions and the dangers of professional arrogance. King Edward had quietly instituted changes in palace protocol to ensure that serious medical decisions would always involve consultation with multiple physicians. He had also established a fund to support Dr. Whitfield's village practice, ensuring that other children would have access to the skilled care that had saved Charlotte's life. One child's crisis should benefit all children, the king explained to his advisors. If Charlotte's illness leads to better medical care for others, then something positive will have come from our ordeal. The upcoming coronation ceremony, which had been postponed during Charlotte's illness, was rescheduled for the following month. Charlotte was determined to participate, though her role would be modified to account for her recent surgery. Instead of walking in the long procession, she would ride in a decorated carriage, allowing her to be part of the celebration without overexerting herself. "I want everyone to see that I am healthy and strong," Charlotte told her parents. "I want them to know that their princess is all right." Marcus understood her desire to reassure the people of the kingdom. News of Charlotte's illness had spread throughout the realm, and many subjects had been genuinely worried about their beloved young princess. Her appearance at the coronation would be both a celebration and a declaration of victory over illness. As the weeks passed, Marcus found himself reflecting often on the choices that had saved Charlotte's life. His decision to research her symptoms, to push for a second opinion, to challenge medical authority, all of these actions had gone against his usual deference to established protocol. But Charlotte's trust in him had given him the courage to act. "You taught me something important," he told Charlotte during one of their conversations. "You taught me that sometimes protecting someone means being willing to make people uncomfortable, to ask difficult questions, to refuse to accept answers that do not feel right." Charlotte considered this seriously, her young face thoughtful. "Sometimes grown-ups are wrong," she asked. "Sometimes," Marcus agreed. "Even good people, smart people, can make mistakes. That is why it is important to ask questions and to listen to different opinions." "Like getting a second opinion from Dr. Whitfield?" "Exactly like that." Charlotte nodded, filing away this lesson for future use. Marcus hoped she would remember that being a princess did not mean always deferring to authority, that sometimes leadership required challenging the status quo. Lady Margaret had become even more protective of Charlotte since the illness, if such a thing were possible. She monitored the princess's activities carefully, ensuring that she did not overexert herself during recovery. But she also encouraged Charlotte's growing independence and thoughtfulness. "Our girl has grown up considerably," Lady Margaret told Marcus. "The illness was terrible, but it has taught her valuable lessons about resilience and the importance of speaking up when something is wrong." Marcus agreed. Charlotte now asked more questions about her lessons, showed more interest in the welfare of palace servants, and demonstrated a new awareness of the fragility and preciousness of life. These were mature insights for a 10-year-old, but they would serve her well as a future queen. The scar from Charlotte's surgery was healing well, barely visible beneath her clothing. Dr. Whitfield had been careful to make the incision as small as possible and to close it with tiny, neat stitches. In time, it would be nothing more than a thin line, a permanent reminder of a crisis survived. "Will anyone be able to see it?" Charlotte had asked worriedly during one of her follow-up examinations. "It will be very faint," Dr. Whitfield assured her. "And even if it were visible, it would be nothing to be ashamed of. Scars are proof that we have survived something difficult. They are marks of courage, not weakness." Marcus liked that perspective. His own body carried scars from various battles and accidents over the years. He had always thought of them as reminders of lessons learned, prices paid for wisdom gained. Charlotte's scar would serve the same purpose, a reminder of how precious life was and how important it was to seek help when needed. On the 1-month anniversary of Charlotte's surgery, the entire palace staff gathered for a special celebration. It was not an official ceremony, but rather a spontaneous expression of relief and gratitude that their beloved princess had recovered completely. Cook prepared Charlotte's favorite foods. The musicians played her favorite songs, and everyone shared stories about how worried they had been and how happy they were to see her healthy again. Charlotte moved through the gathering like a small queen, thanking each person individually for their concern and care during her illness. She had learned the names of servants she had never paid attention to before, understanding now that everyone in the palace was part of her extended family. "Thank you for praying for me," she told the kitchen maids. "Thank you for keeping my room clean," she said to the housekeepers. "Thank you for taking care of my horse," she told the stable boys. Each person received personal recognition for their role in her recovery. When she reached Marcus, Charlotte paused for a longer conversation. "Captain Thompson," she said formally, though her eyes sparkled with affection, "I want to give you something." She handed him a small object wrapped in silk. Inside was a wooden carving of a knight on horseback, clearly made by a child's hands, but executed with care and attention to detail. "I made it myself," Charlotte explained. "Lady Margaret taught me how to use the carving tools safely. It is a knight who protects princesses, like you protect me." Marcus felt his eyes fill with tears as he examined the gift. The carving was simple but heartfelt, clearly representing hours of work by small, still-recovering hands. It was the most precious gift he had ever received. "I will treasure this always, princess," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It will remind me of the bravest, strongest princess in all the world." Charlotte beamed at the compliment, then grew more serious. "Captain Thompson, I want to make you a promise, just like you promised to protect me." "What kind of promise, princess?" "I promise that if I ever feel sick again, I will tell someone right away. I will not try to be brave and hide it. And I promise that if someone I care about is sick, I will make sure they get the help they need, even if it means asking difficult questions or challenging people in authority." Marcus felt a surge of pride at her words. Charlotte had learned the most important lesson of all from her ordeal, that seeking help was not weakness, and that advocating for proper care was a form of strength and love. "That is the best promise you could make, princess," he told her. "And I know you will keep it because you are wise and caring and strong." As the celebration continued around them, Marcus reflected on how much had changed since that terrible night when Charlotte first cried out in pain. The experience had tested everyone involved: doctors, family members, servants, and guards. Some had risen to the challenge immediately, others had needed time to find their way. But in the end, love and persistence had triumphed over pride and protocol. Charlotte would grow up to be a remarkable queen someday. Marcus was certain. Her illness had taught her compassion for suffering, respect for those who served her, and the importance of seeking multiple perspectives before making important decisions. These were invaluable lessons for a future ruler. His hands no longer shook when he thought about that crisis. Instead, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction and purpose. He had kept his promise to protect Charlotte, even when protection meant challenging the very people who were supposed to keep her safe. The trust she had placed in him had been rewarded, and their bond had been strengthened beyond anything he had imagined possible. The little girl who had asked him if he would always protect her now knew that protection sometimes came in unexpected forms. Research in dusty libraries, insistence on second opinions, refusal to accept inadequate answers. Marcus had learned that being a true guardian meant never giving up hope, never stopping the search for solutions, and never accepting that nothing more could be done. Charlotte was alive, healthy, and wiser for her ordeal. The kingdom would be blessed to have her as their queen when the time came. And Marcus would continue to serve her family with the knowledge that sometimes the greatest victories came not from defeating external enemies, but from refusing to surrender to fear, ignorance, and despair. The royal guard's hands no longer shook, because Princess Charlotte no longer cried in pain. The promise had been kept, the trust had been honored, and love had conquered fear. It was, Marcus reflected, the greatest victory of his life.